All right, Esther chapter 3, let's call this one Look at Me Part 2, because even though this chapter is going to shift to focus on Haman, Haman is going to have a lot in common with King Ahasuerus and their shared need for attention, because in this chapter, after Mordecai and Esther have saved the life of the king sometime later, this is going to be the story of how Haman rises to prominence in Ahasuerus' Persia, and accordingly, the king is going to issue an edict that everybody, at least everybody in this chapter that we see, has to bow before Haman, which is going to create a problem because Mordecai is not going to do that. And he is going to gain attention for all of the wrong reasons when he refuses to bow to Haman, and it creates a buzz that is carried back to Haman, which is going to cause Haman to resent Mordecai. And not just resent Mordecai, he's going to hate Mordecai to the point where he is going to want to get even with all of the Jews, since even though Mordecai has made it clear to Esther that she needs to keep her Jewish heritage secret, he has made it clear that he is Jewish. And that is going to set Haman off on a path to look for a way to get even with all of the Jews, even though he has a problem that's directly linked, in this chapter at least, to one man. And ultimately, he's going to cast Pur, something that the people of Israel are likewise familiar with, which he's going to do month after month until after about, it looks like 12 months of casting Pur, it's going to show him that the 12th month for some reason has some significance, at which point he is going to go to King Ahasuerus with a general question or a general request that comes along with a lot of money, and that lot of money is going to seem to cause King Ahasuerus to relax common sense and not ask enough questions about who it is that Haman's asking to kill, especially since he's asking to kill an entire group of people dispersed throughout Persia. And so as the chapter comes to a close, I'm not going to summarize most of it, might not do it the justice it deserves, but they're going to issue an edict, King Ahasuerus handing over his signet ring to Haman, who drafts an order to kill all the Jews in the 12th month of that same year, understanding that they're meeting in the first month of the year. And King Ahasuerus' inattention to detail reminded me of where we started the week, looking at Nehemiah chapter 10, where Nehemiah and Ezra spent a lot of their ministries trying to undo the damage that Israel did when they engaged in relationships based on having a few things in common with the people of the land, not realizing that beyond the deep connection they might have seemed to have in a few areas, they differed in some really important ways. Likewise, King Ahasuerus, probably placing too much emphasis on his affection for Haman and the money that Haman was bringing him, didn't really ask enough questions to realize that Haman was essentially asking him to kill his wife and the man who had already saved his life. And so this chapter gives us another illustration of the danger of forming deep commitments based on having a few things in common. But beyond that, I am not a counselor, but in my travels, I've come across this concept called the dark triad. And Haman seems to give a few red flags for the dark triad. And in our Wednesday night class, we talked about the way in which the chapter expressly describes the way that Haman rises to prominence, but it says almost nothing about what he actually does, much less what he would do well. So we don't see anything about his talents, but we see a craving for power and him actually being super insulted when one man, Mordecai, doesn't bow to him. And the craving to grasp for power without any underlying skill set that would justify a person being given a position of authority is something that is sometimes a red flag for what they call Machiavellianism. Likewise, his desire to get even with an entire ethnicity of people because of his gripe with one man suggests what some would call sociopathy or psychopathy, meaning he has no empathy for people who haven't necessarily wronged him, but the scope of his rage seems to have no bounds, and he needs to get even at whatever cost he sees fit, because he feels entitled to that level of vengeance. And finally, neither psychopathy nor sociopathy necessarily need a whole lot of attention. And so when we see this and later chapters describing Haman as someone who needs an excessive amount of public praise, thus the title of this chapter, Look at Me Part 2, then we have a red flag for the more famous part of the dark triad, and that is narcissism. Understanding, as I've said before, that I am not a counselor, but I've had a little bit of experience in looking at the dark triad, and I've had a little bit of experience in looking at Haman, and the two seem to have a lot in common. And beyond the dark triad, the thing that seems to connect this story to right now is the way in which Haman refuses to contend with his desire to seek praise without any objective justification for being praised. And I think to a certain degree, we all want to be praised, even when we might not necessarily deserve it. But to the degree we realize that we need to hold ourselves accountable and say, look, if I want praise, I actually need to achieve something that would justify the praise that I'm getting, then we are avoiding the trap that Haman is about to fall into in future chapters. See, because he doesn't necessarily care about the ways in which his desire for unjustified praise hurts other people. But much like Ahasuerus, what he fails to realize is the degree to which his desire for unjustified praise is actually self-destructive, as we'll see in the rest of Esther.